Okay, today we're going to tie the gold rib hare's ear nymph, and I'm going to start this one off in a size 10 hook. This happens to be a barbless hook, but you can always mash the barb down, and you might need to get the bead on. So we're going to use today with this hook, we're going to use a 1/8 inch gold bead. It's just a brass bead. The lighter ones are made out of brass and the heavier ones are made out of tungsten. So depending on where you want to fish this nymph will determine how much weight you use. So you could use a heavier bead, or you could put some lead wraps on it to make it sink a little bit better, and that's what we're going to do. So we're going to use some 0.015 lead-free wire to get it a little deeper, and I'm going to put about 10 to 12 wraps on there. So 1, 2, 10, 11, 12. That was 12. And then you just snip it off. You can usually just do that with your fingers. And then if there's no little tag up there in the front, you can just push it right up into the bead, just like that. And I use snips usually to cut off that little end there, and if it isn't spinning around on the hook, you can just push that little tag down. If it is spinning, what you can do is put a little dab of super glue right here, and then just push that right up in there and hold it for a second, and it will stay nice and tight. So I really only do that if I find that that wire is spinning around the hook and I can't push that little tag down with my fingertip. We're going to use some olive thread for this, and this is the UTC Ultra Thread in olive, and this is 140 denier, which is the equivalent of a 6/0 thread in the other brands. So we're going to tie just behind the wire wraps, and we're going to build up what we call a little thread dam. Got a little split there, but that's no problem. So a little dam right there, and that's going to keep the lead wraps from spinning around and moving. And then I just wrap over them a little bit, a couple times, and then wrap down to just about, not quite to the bend, but between where the hook barb would be and the point. Okay, so the next element we tie in is going to be the rib. So we're going to use some gold wire for that, and this is a brassy gold wire here, and I've just cut off a piece of it like that, and let's see if I can find that. Yep, here's the brassy gold wire. Okay, comes in different thicknesses, all of these wires. And brassy, who knows what brassy means, but it's a little bit heavier. It's sort of in the middle to the higher end of the heaviness of threads. So I'm just going to address the hook with the wire at a little bit of an angle, and what I'm going to try to do is use it to build up some of that difference between where the thickness is of the lead wraps and the less wrapped body of the fly. So a little kink in that wire there, but we'll work that out. Okay, so now that wire is on, and remember that you always tie things on in the opposite direction. So the first thing you tie on would be the last thing that gets wrapped. Now for the tail, we're going to use pheasant tail fibers, and it's just a natural brown color here. And usually the fibers that are on one side are longer, and the fibers on the other side are shorter. And I've actually used up all of the really long fibers on this feather, which are usually kind of in the middle of the feather. But I think the ones that are on the shorter side actually were going to be plenty long enough. So we're just going to take a handful of those and sort of pull them away from the stem of the feather, and then snip off about, I don't know, 10 to 12. You can get away with less. And I'm just going to line them up and make a tail. And the tail, you're going to have to judge it against the length of the hook. So maybe about a half of a length of the hook would be the tail. So I'm going to take that measurement and then just put it towards the back and then hold it and do a pinch wrap to secure it to the hook. And then just do some spiral wraps and you can get it all the way up. And if it's a long enough feather, you can also use this for the wing case as well. So I might need to add some to it because it's a little sparse, but I am going to attempt to use the remainder of this for the wing case. Okay, the next thing to put on is the dubbing, and I've got a little mixture here of hare's ear dubbing and hare's mask dubbing, and the hare's ear dubbing is a little bit spikier. So this is the hare's ear dubbing. You can see it's really spiky stuff. I like it, and it's in a little light color, but I've also taken some of the mask of the rabbit and buzzed it up on the food processor or the coffee mill and made a softer dubbing with it. And I just mixed the two together with my fingers, kind of just, you know, going like this, and it kind of gives you the best of both worlds. So I'm going to back my thread back to the, I'm going to have to back the camera up a little bit to get a little bit more room there. Okay. Back to the bend where the wire is and the tail starts. And then I'm just going to take little bits at a time and start putting it on the thread and build up what we call a very skinny noodle. And you got to use a lot of pressure to do this. And once you've got some on, I usually just slide it up. And once you can do that, if you can do a couple of wraps right there and get that first little part onto the hook, the rest of it's going to be a lot easier because there's something to hold it together and it won't spin around quite so much. So I'm going to put on the amount that I think I need to tie up to the thorax, and it's always a good idea to do a little bit less than you think because it's very easy to add dubbing, but it's not so easy to take it away. So I'm just going to take that and start making a tapered body, and if it gets too skinny like that, I can just go back and kind of make it a little fatter, and I want to build it up to about the 1/3 point. So 1/3 back from the hook, eye, and the bead. What's going on with my scissors? Okay, my different scissors here. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to wrap the rib up the body, making a segmentation. And you can over wrap, you can go a little higher up into the sparse part of the hook, really get that wire on there, and then just bind that down really well. And at this point you can, what we call, do a helicopter action. You can wind your bobbin up to secure it up against the hook and just go like that, and it should break off. If it doesn't, just use your snips. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bind this remainder of pheasant tail back, and because I've got plenty here, I'm going to add some to it. So I'm just going to take some of that and make it a little bit thicker so it has a little bit more dimension there. You can see that it's going to be a lot thicker for that wing case. Now I'm going to make another noodle for the thorax of the fly, and this I can put on a little bit heavier because the thorax is almost always a lot thicker than the body part. And so I'm going to take some wraps and just bind that on real good, and I'm just going to keep going a little bit because you're really going to be able to tease that out nicely afterwards, and what that's going to do is give you some legs on either side of the thorax. So that's nice, just like that. Okay, now we say now for the fun part. I'm going to take that wing case and just pull it right over, and you can use your fingernail to spread it out a little bit and then do a nice pinch wrap just like that, bind it down nice and tight. I usually do 1 or 2 wraps at the juncture, a couple of wraps behind the bead, and then again back over that. So you could snip that off just like that. And pretty much the fly is built. We do have a couple of tweaks to do. We're going to do a whip finish there, 4 or 5. Cut off your tag end, and then we're going to take a little brush, and you could use your dubbing needle for this too if you don't have a little brush. So I have like a little, it's almost like Velcro on a popsicle stick, which you can actually build very easily. This one, whoops, there goes my magnet. I have a magnet on one side and some Velcro on the other. So this is a handy little tool on the end of a toothbrush, and so I can use this brush, I can use the Velcro end, and I can use the magnet for picking up hooks and beads and things. So I think I will use this one, and I'm just going to rough up each side of that nymph and pull out, just give it a good raking, and you can see that that pulls out those legs on either side. Just like that. That looks pretty good. You can really keep going. That's why you want to build up a lot of dubbing on the thorax. You can always trim the body part a little bit down if you want to. I don't think it's really that necessary because these mayfly nymphs have gills on either side of their body, and those little fuzzy bits represent those gills. So I'm going to put a little ultraviolet UV cure on the wing case. Now you can just use head cement if you don't have any of this, but this does give you a little bit glossier coating. And I'm going to also put a little bit over the thread wraps and use an ultraviolet light on it, and that will harden it right away. So if you use head cement, you're going to let it sit for a little bit. And you know, if you're using head cement, you could use your bodkin with your and dip it into your head cement. I use a little applicator, so I'm going to put a little bit of head cement right there to secure those wraps, and then your fly is done. Here's your gold rib, here's your nymph, beaded. We'll get down, sink, but not sink like a stone, but sink to probably the middle of the water column depending on the rate of the flow of the water. So really, really useful fly. I think you should have lots of them in lots of different sizes. You can tie them down really, really tiny. I probably would go to an 18 is the smallest, and up to an 8 for the biggest. So you can have a whole range of them in your fly box. Okay, there you go. First one in the installment of fly tying videos. Thanks.